Coming up on ITV News London, a man who is being questioned on suspicion of Alice Gross's murder is released on bail. A husband's plea at the inquest into the death of his wife, who was crushed in the Valentine's Day storms. And could your council save you hundreds on your rent? Those stories and more at 6. Coming up, where next in the search for missing Alice Gross as the man who was arrested on suspicion of her murder is released on bail.
Now on ITV, the national and international news is coming up in 30 minutes after the news from your area.
Good evening and welcome to the ITV News in London. Tonight's main stories. Was missing Alice's rucksack planted beside the canal where she was last seen?
It could well be that someone is intent on diverting police resources into searching the canal here when it may not be that she's here.
Pilot error blamed for the helicopter crash which killed 2 people. The new rules that could stop your landlord hiking up your rent. And no longer Oxbridge only, the Fulham club making rowing a sport for all. Hello, I'm Charlene White. A man arrested on suspicion of murdering missing schoolgirl Alice Gross has been released on bail. It's now 12 days since its 14-year-old disappeared. Today, a former Met commander told ITV News that her rucksack could have been planted to distract police. The search has centred around the Grand Union Canal where that bag was found. Our senior correspondent Ronke Phillips has the latest.
It's now been 12 days since the teenager, a talented musician and songwriter, went missing. The investigation to find Alice Gross has centred around a small stretch of the Grand Union Canal where she was last captured on CCTV. It was the discovery of her purple rucksack 5 days after she vanished, which led to the search being intensified.
I think that they're still keeping a totally open mind.
But former Scotland Yard detective John O'Connor believes there's always the possibility Alice's bag was deliberately left on the towpath.
Could have been left by the missing child herself, or there's an opportunity, I would have thought, for somebody trying to mislead police to put it sometime after she'd gone missing. So it could well be that someone is intent on diverting police resources into searching the canal here when it may not be that she's here.
Specialist police divers from 3 different forces have been trawling the canal since late last week. But for the first few days after Alice went missing, the case was treated only as a missing persons inquiry.
People can only be found, within the golden sort of 48 hours if they're findable. I wouldn't have any criticism of the police. I think the police have done everything in their power. They've handled it as a missing persons case, which is correct.
You've run lots of investigations like this in your former career as a DI. Where would you be taking the investigation now?
Well, I'd be looking for keeping it in the media eye, keeping the publicity going, and also keep monitoring those social media.
9,000.
Nearly 10,000 now.
Last week, the 14-year-old's family revealed she suffers from anorexia. They're clinging to the hope she vanished of her own accord. And with the police insisting this is, above all, still a missing persons inquiry, it's one of the many lines they'll be following.
They're considering all options, and that's the right thing to do. But when the evidence points somewhere, then they'll focus in on a particular aspect of the investigation.
A 25-year-old man who was being questioned on suspicion of murder in connection with Alice's disappearance has been released on bail, leaving the question of what happened to her a mystery. Ronke Phillips, ITV News.
The helicopter crash in Vauxhall that killed 2 people could have been avoided if the pilot had stuck to the rules about flying into cloud. That's the conclusion of an official report into the crash, which happened in January 2013. The pilot, Pete Barnes, and a pedestrian, Matthew Wood, were both killed when the helicopter hit a crane on top of a construction site. Simon Harris has the details.
It was the day wreckage fell from the sky and flames lit up a street. Rush hour on a cold and foggy January morning. A helicopter was trying to divert to Battersea Heliport when the pilot made a terrible error. In low cloud and poor visibility, the Augusta 109 hit a tower crane at the top of a new high-rise 700 feet above the Thames.
He really only got one thing wrong, which was to fly into cloud near the building so that he couldn't see the building and hit the crane. If the cloud hadn't been there, it wouldn't have happened, or if he hadn't flown into the cloud, it wouldn't have happened.
The pilot, Captain Pete Barnes, died instantly. Matthew Wood, a pedestrian on his way to work, was also killed. Today, an official report concluded the pilot did not see the crane or saw it too late to take effective avoiding action. The pilot continued with his decision to land at the London heliport despite being unable to remain clear of cloud.
The basic rule is to remain clear of cloud. We expect the pilot to be able to see tall structures and other obstructions and avoid them visually.
And that's a legal requirement.
That's what the air navigation order requires.
Captain Barnes was highly experienced. He flew helicopters in the Bond movie Die Another Day. He had more than 10,000 hours in his logbook. But on the day he died, he pushed his luck. He sent a text to his passenger waiting on the ground saying, "I'm coming anyway, will land in a field if I have to." Simon Mitchell, a commercial pilot and air safety expert, was a friend. He says today's report confirms what everyone in the helicopter industry knows. Pilots can put themselves under pressure.
Sometimes the better thing is not to fly in the first place. And it's very, very difficult to make that call because we naturally want to please the customer, whoever that customer is, and we're very averse to making a disappointing call that says, today we're not going.
The accident report also echoes industry concern about new high-rise buildings. But ultimately, the Vauxhall helicopter crash was a tragic case of pilot error. Simon Harris, ITV News.
The man accused of beheading a grandmother in her own garden with a machete has refused to appear in court via video link. Nicholas Salvador is charged with the murder of 82-year-old Palmyra Silva in Edmonton last Thursday. The 25-year-old defendant, who was due to appear at the Old Bailey via video link from Belmarsh Prison, said he wanted to be present in court for the hearing. Online donations have poured in for a cyclist killed on Sunday while completing a 12-day charity bike ride. 34-year-old Anna Roots, seen here on the right, died following a collision with a lorry in Scotland. She has raised more than £10,000, doubling her fundraising target. The husband of a taxi driver who died when a building collapsed on her car during the Valentine's Day storms said today he fears it could happen to someone else. Steve Stillo's wife, Julie, died instantly in the accident in Holborn in February. Well, today an inquest ruled she was killed accidentally. Ria Chatterjee is at St Pancras Coroner's Court for us. So, Ria, what exactly did the inquest find?
Well, essentially, there's no one at fault here, Charlene. It seems that Julie Sillito was the victim of a tragic mix of bad weather and simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. She'd gone out to work on a wintry evening with extremely high winds and bad weather. She was driving along High Holborn when part of a 6-storey Victorian building came crashing down onto her car. Now, the owner of the building told the inquest that he hadn't carried out a full structural survey on the building since he bought it in 2007, and crucially he isn't legally obliged to do that. Now he says he will. I put that to Julie's husband.
I appreciate the gesture, but it does nothing for me. I think what really amazes me is the fact that there's no legislation that protects any one of us going about our business, that any one of us can be walking home tonight and be crushed by a falling masonry, and there's nothing that protects us. All we become is accidents, like my wife.
Now, a witness at the inquest who saw Julie at the scene spoke of how she had no chance of surviving. Steve now wants there to be stricter regulations on old buildings in the city. He spoke to Julie on the night that she went out to work. He asked her to stay at home, and he says that those words now ring in his ears every day.
Ria, thanks very much. An 81-year-old widow who died after being left at home without care for 9 days died of natural causes contributed to by neglect. That's what a jury ruled today. Gloria Foster was found dehydrated and starving at her Banstead home in January last year. She was soaked in her own urine and faeces. A jury at her inquest today found a gross failure to provide Mrs Foster with basic care had contributed to her death. In a statement, Surrey County Council said, "We would again like to say how sorry we are for our failure to help Gloria Foster get the support she needed. We should have done more and we completely accept that. While we have already made changes following this dreadful case, we continue to do all we can to prevent anything like this happening again." Well, I'm joined now by Gordon Deshez from Age UK. Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, how common is a situation like this, Gordon?
Well, this is a really tragic and extreme case which mustn't be allowed to happen again. There are lessons that can be learned from this, but something so extreme and horrible like this must be prevented.
Well, Surrey County Council has promised to change. In what way should they be changing? It seems like a complete lack of communication.
Well, without going too much into the detail here, one thing that comes out clearly from it is that older people who have been assessed as being eligible for care, even if they're paying for the care themselves, must receive the necessary information from local authorities to make sure that their care continues and continues to run effectively.
Now, the fact of the matter is that up to a million elderly people can go for a whole month without speaking to anyone, which is an incredible level of loneliness and isolation. But that fact would come as a shock to some.
It would come as a shock to some people, but the way society is nowadays, there are more and more older people who don't have much or enough opportunity just to meet other people on a day-to-day basis.
So what more can we all do? Is it down to neighbours, social workers, council? You know, what support is there out there for them?
Well, for example, we can do things like volunteer at local Age UKs. Local Age UKs across London run a lot of activities like befriending schemes and other ways of stopping people being isolated. Something else that people can do is that it is worthwhile if you have an older neighbour who you might be concerned about, just every so often to look in and check up on them.
OK, well, Gordon, thank you so much for all that advice.
Thank you.
We are watching the ITV News in London, still to come. The West London club trying to rid rowing of elitism and...
Granddad's a legend. Thank you, Grandad.
We reveal that the second of our finalists in the search for Pride of Britain fundraiser. Next, rules regulating increases, rent increases, the answer to the capital's housing crisis. Well, more than half of Londoners rent properties, and the cost of that has gone up, on average, by 27% in the last 3 years. A report commissioned by Camden Council suggests capping rent increases, which could slow that trend down. But is that a practical solution? Luke Hanrahan has been investigating.
Rosie is one of almost 2 million people in the capital who rents. She's been a tenant for 18 years and in that time has seen the annual cost of renting rocket. Now paying 6 times what she paid in the late 90s, Rosie says it's an unsustainable situation.
You never really know where you're going to be living in a few months' time, and one of the awful things is that renters we're forced to compete with each other now. So quite often when you go and look at a flat to rent, there'll be 10 other people looking at it as well, and you'll be encouraged to bid against each other. And that's one of the things that's pushing rents up to unaffordable levels.
Across the capital, tenants have been squeezed by rising prices, as those unable to access mortgages or raise the sums needed to buy have found themselves trapped for longer as a tenant, driving up demand for homes.